And yeah, man, I think for me, racism still continues, and it's still structural. And I think for me, a verse which comes from the Bible that Jesus spoke was that, for example, Jesus just said in the Bible that, one person asked him, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, love your God with all your heart, soul, and body, right? Mm-hmm. And the next one, which is equal to that one, is love your neighbor as yourself. It shows Jesus knew the struggle was going to be real for us to love ourselves. Hello everyone.
Hello guys.
Yes, welcome to our YouTube channel.
Welcome back. And thank you to the ones who subscribed. Thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed, please remember to subscribe. Let's grow the family. Let's tackle these issues like the one we're gonna tackle today. So today we want to talk about our experiences with racism, guys. This is certainly a very big topic that we want to delve deeper into later on. It's not something we can cover in one sitting, in one video. So today we're just going to talk about our experiences. The tenets of racism are huge. They are far-reaching. They're a mess. Okay. So today we're just going to talk about our experiences. And
maybe and so we'll give each of our account in terms of experience.
Okay, so I'll start. For me, I don't come from a very racially charged background, so I never had to face racism in much of my upbringing. I can only remember like isolated cases of racism, like for example when I was a toddler and would go to the mall with my mom and I'd want to play with each and every kid, white, black, whatever, and my mom would sway me from the white kids. And their parents would give me side eyes. And when I would ask my mom why, my mom would say, no, white people are just insecure people that choose to live in hate and in fear, which was a pretty hectic thing to tell a toddler, but I got to understand it as I was older. Another isolated case was, I think, when we were celebrating a friend's 21st birthday and we were walking in the streets of Bloemfontein in the Free State. It was late in the evening. We were just walking around, jolly, having a nice time. And then a bakkie came and passed by. It was Afrikaner kids and they had wrapped rotten food in plastics.
Sure.
And they hit us with them, like they hit us with them. And the moment we saw what was happening, they had driven off. So that was my experience. But when I really, in my upbringing, those were isolated experience. I didn't have to live with racism. I had a pretty good upbringing I was very assured. I never had to reassure my validity as a human being. The time when I really had to engage with the concepts of racism and find myself having to assure myself on a daily was when I went to varsity and I had white classmates, making quite a huge part of the space of our academic space then. And I remember when my first encounter with them was a compliment. These compliments that they make, 2 compliments actually. This is my first encounter. They were like, you look so nice, so refreshing seeing a person who's proud of their hair and wearing their hair proudly. And another one was like, you speak so well and so articulately for a black girl, And I remember just thinking, the thing with racism is sometimes it leaves you despondent, sometimes it leaves you blaming yourself for letting them go for the things that you do. But you know what, sometimes when you're pure at heart, you don't always think about how you're going to respond to these things, right? Anyway, I forgave myself. I let it go. I didn't talk back or anything. because I didn't know what to do.
Mm.
I remember another time when we were in our first year when we studied maths. We had TAT afternoons, and in the TAT's tutorials, they would put us in groups of 4. And I remember in my group of 4, I was the only black girl, and I was with 3 white girls. And I remember they had an issue with a problem. They hadn't asked me. I'd been trying to help them because I understood that we're in a group, we're gonna work together. But no, their point was to dismiss me. Okay. And I remember I had a good aptitude for mathematics. Okay. I was a pretty bright kid. So they were like, okay, so if you can't figure this, if all the 3 of us cannot figure this out, then let's call a tutor here to come help us. But I'm like, there's 4 of us here. But anyway, I thought that in my sleep at night. I was like, no. She said there's 3. If the 3 of them, there's 3, they didn't say 4. Was it deliberate? Like, did she notice that she said 3 or whatever? So some of these things that they do, you wake up in your sleep and you're like, did they I remember another
They
account.
skipped you.
Yeah, literally.
Sure.
They did. Yeah. I remember another time when we were coming from holidays, summer holidays. We were in a group in a lab waiting for our results. It was a group of 8, if I remember well. There were 5 white kids and 3 black ones, including myself. And they were talking about their holidays. Some of them had been to Bali with family, some had been to the Maldives, some were experiencing winter in the UK and all of that. And I remember this girl who had this girl who had initiated the conversation, literally and blatantly skipped every black kid in the group to ask only the white ones what they were up to during their holidays, because I think most likely she was thinking we obviously didn't do much because black families don't afford to go to the Maldives. Well, according to probably her thought process, I don't know what she was thinking, but that's when I got to learn that no, actually these racist things that they do are actually deliberate, and it's not because they're ignorant, and it is not upon us to teach them how to act right, because they are deliberate. They want to make those comments. They are not mistaken. I remember here our class used to have so much racial tension. I remember this one time one of the black girls in my class had their natural hair out in an afro, and one of the white guys was like, "Ooh, your hair looks like sheep's wool," and they'll make all excuses about how they didn't mean it that way, but how do you mean it? Really. That was pretty much my experience. And from that I learned that yes, they are deliberate, and all of it is meant to deter you. All of it is meant to make you feel less than. And I got to remember my mom's words when she would say, these are people who are insecure. How you know an insecure person is a person who's constantly looking for opportunities to make others feel less than or inferior, right? So I got to understand why she was saying that white people are generally insecure. That was my experience. I feel like there's been so many accounts. I'm probably skipping some of them. But what I learned that racism is a problem. It's there. It cannot be ignored. In the eyes of God, everyone who believes and looks on God, we're all the same. But we shouldn't confuse that with color blindness, right? It is important to recognize racism, to recognize color, because it comes with a history. And there are injustices of the past that do need to be worked through, do need to be confronted, and do need to be addressed. So That was my
Hectic.
experience.
Hey, they kept skipping you. Hey, these white kids.
And quite weirdly, of that group, I'm the only one that graduated on record time. 2 of them didn't even make it past the first semester. The other one, I think she changed career paths.
Hectic.
Yeah.
Hectic.
So yeah.
Hectic. And I always tell her when she tells me the story about the white people throwing tomatoes and things like
Rotten food.
Rotten
Wrapped in
food.
plastics.
Yeah, I was like, I would have picked up stones, but I understand.
In that moment, you don't know how to deal with this, especially if it's not something you constantly experience.
And hectic. I think we all experience. There's so many accounts of racism that you can't finish. You have to write a book. And I was just start off with mine. I think my first encounter of racism was when I was watching a music video with my family when I was young. I think I was 4 or 5. And this video had this granny, this black granny, getting beaten by white people. And I used to run off and cry.
Do you remember what song that was?
No, I don't remember. I think I was just too young, and I don't know what the song was. But and it played quite often. That was my first encounter. And then I think most of my encounters as I was growing up was because of my father. My father was in the army. He fought in the liberation struggle. So he used to tell me a lot of accounts of what was happening in the past. Even when they were going to war, what was happening in those situations. And I got to learn a lot about how deep racism was then, and obviously still is now, because you would think it's finished, but it's not. And then I think because us black people and white people never mix, we always live in different, we live So my next encounter, I think, was when I went to university. Same thing, white people sitting on their own, black people sitting on their own. But university really opened my eyes because I managed to take account with other black people, from other backgrounds other than my own. And it really opened my eyes of how deep the structural racism is amongst black people, from just their accounts. And on that note, that's when you start to see the things she's talking about in university, like getting left out. And that happened, I think, in my first year, where I was assigned with these 2 white girls, and they were supposed to do a project together, and they left me out. Completely and submitted without
and they
me.
do that thing where when you say something smart that solves the problem, they will dismiss you.
Yeah.
Only for them to say the exact same thing, and then when they say it, they make it look like it's the smartest thing that ever came out of a human's mouth. Right? And that's when you see that these things are deliberate. They are not ignorant. They are very deliberate. They know what they're doing.
And I think it was a shock because in that first test that we wrote, I came out first, actually. I came out first, and it was a shock to a lot of white people because I think because they are used to not seeing a black person succeed. And I think it's just a few reasons. It's because they're never mixed with black people.
Probably.
They go to schools where it's just white people or a few black people. And you never encounter a space with black people who can challenge their minds, And that was what university was. There were black people who were performing, were doing well in school, and who could, interact and debate with them in a level space, you know, and they couldn't find a way to demean them and say, no, this is just a worker, you know, this is just a cleaning lady, you know, what does she know? Because you had the qualifications, you had the right, you know, to say, you know, I know what I'm talking about, and they couldn't find any fault to dismiss you. So yeah, that's university for me. A lot of it was, I think it was always subtle racism, you know, this thing like leaving you out in certain things, you know, speaking over you and these kind of things.
You question your intelligence.
This subtle racism. But for me, I think we saw the divide when we had the Fees Must Fall protest, because it started in my final year. That was in 2015.
I was in my second year at the University of Cape Town. I remember that it started with Roads Must Fall. That's what happened in 2015. And then Fees Must Fall came as came later on. I remember that very well.
Yeah, so that divided our class completely. Then you started to see, because in university they have this thing where they say there's an open discussion,
especially
and
the University of Cape Town.
Yeah,
they like positioning themselves as this transformed university that is all welcoming and, you know, very diverse, and they like positioning themselves as that, but the reality on the ground, not so much.
And yeah, as she say, like the debates and the remarks that were coming out were shocking. You know, the ideologies that people have of black people are shocking, to say the least. You know, by the end of them, there was a clear divide in the class, you know, between black and white people. Just in the debates, from the debates in the class themselves, let alone the protests that were happening outside. So yeah,
you know, in our class, that very year during the Roads Must Fall movement, there was so much racial tension in our class that they even had to bring the UCT, what is it called? Disco. They call it discrimination something. To come talk to us in a couple of sessions, because we were just not gelling together. You know, there was the tension was so tangible that you could feel it and cut it in the air.
Could cut it with a knife.
Yeah.
It was very hectic. That's when you started to see that the subtle racism went away, and the racism that's not subtle came out from people, you know, and it was the blatant one. It was very and I think my next encounter was when I started working in a mine as a graduate engineer, and that's where, you know, they would undermine my intelligence even though I had a qualification, you know, I had good marks, you know, and they would make me feel like I'm not worth being there, you know, but I performed. And the sad thing about, I think, my account is that because I've been smart since high school, you know, university, I didn't do that bad, you know, I've been smart. So that usually covered what, you know, white people would look at me and say, okay, but he's smart, you know, and use that to justify to treat me like a human being. Which is sad, because you're supposed to treat someone like a human being just because they're human, you know.
Not because they worked for it.
Not because they work for it, not because they are smart, you know. And that's why they would talk to me, because they considered me smart, which is a sad thing, you know. It's those kind of race, I don't know what you can call it, what you coined that thing, but it's something. It's some type of way. So yeah, I got the same thing when I was working, but they managed to see my skill because I worked in projects. I was coding for them, which is something they weren't doing in the mine, and doing very important things in their projects. And that's when I earned their respect, which is, you know, that's what I was talking about, the same thing that happened in university, you know. And that racism persists everywhere, you know, university. So, sorry to go on, I went back for my master's to university, and that's when I decided that I would join the student council now. Like, I'm a fighter now. I'm tired of this, I'm fighting. And when I was in the boardroom, you can see the white representation. You can see the lack of diversity. You can see the lack of the ideologies that are put on the table, and not for black people. You know.
And I think also doing a master's for me was when I got to see what is meant by systematic racism, where I got to really see what is meant by institutional racism. You know, and when you get to see how important representation is in positions of power.
Yeah, it was hectic. I mean, as a student, I was an academic chair of the engineering council, you know, for the postgrads, and I had to fight many battles, you know, and I remember I was fighting many battles, and they were mostly systematic, you know, against black people. Just systematic things like a form that excludes a black person, you know, something so small, but it has so much impact on so many people. And yeah, man, I think for me, racism still continues, you know, and it's still structural. And I think for me, a verse which comes from the Bible that Jesus spoke was that, for example, Jesus just said in the Bible that, you know, one person asked him, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, you know, love your God with all your heart, soul, and body, right? And the next one, which is equal to that one, is love your neighbor as yourself. You know, it shows Jesus knew the struggle was going to be real for us to love ourselves. You know, because white people can't love us. You know, they can't treat us the same. They can't treat us in the same, you know, give us the same rights. You know, they give each other, you know. And that, you know, for me, and I always go about this, that, you know, Christ is against injustice
and hostility. I'm reminded of Ephesians 2:14, where it says that Christ alone is our peace and has come against hostility. I'll put it in here so that you can see and read it for yourself. So in the eyes of Christ, we are really all one. Everyone who calls on him is equal. And yeah, but that shouldn't be confused with being colorblind. Colorblindedness is not the goal. I don't think it should be the goal, because what it does, it scrapes off the history. It makes us blind. It blinds us from the history that caused the situation as it is today, the circumstances as they are today. And I think that while we should see ourselves as equal, we shouldn't then be colorblind, because then we don't give ourselves the opportunity to address the injustices of the past, whose remnants we still feel up until today, whose remnants are still very much active and alive in our lives today, and need to be addressed and need to be confronted. Yeah,
definitely. And I agree with what she's saying, because and on my account, I think I can conclude on that and say, we keep fighting, guys. We keep fighting, and our experiences are just, you know, they keep happening. You know, it's a continuous thing. And my take-home message for people is,
stay focused. You are
stay
valid.
woke.
You are worthy. Don't be deterred. All their deterrent tactics, don't take them to heart. You know, stay focused.
Stay focused.
Remember, you are worthy. You are valid. You are loved. And
also, I would add, this fight is not our battle only. It's also a fight which involves God, because God is really against injustice, you know. Do involve God if you're fighting this battle, you know. Don't fight it on your own strength, because this is a huge system to dismantle, you know. It will take all of us to work towards dismantling this thing, you know. And we have to, you know, for the sake of our future generations and for the sake of ourselves, you know. And also mentally, you know, racism attacks you mentally. I know there's a big talk on the economic front, but it attacks you mentally as well, you know. So psychologically, you know, keep yourself in check, you know. That's why I say, do put your trust in God when you're fighting this thing, you know.
Sure.
We could talk all day about this, you know.
This is why we must cover it again in future.
When
it's not possible to invite people and stuff.
Yeah, and look out for that as well on our channel.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming.
Thanks for watching up until this far. Would encourage you to share your experiences as well. Let people know. Let's hear your stories. Let's work towards this together. Okay. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe. Please do subscribe, like, comment, share. All the beautiful things that for the family. Anyway, tell us your stories in the comment section. Let's engage. All right. And from us, it's a bye. It's a goodbye. Bye, guys. Bye.